can hear from these introductory remarks that apparently this is the closing keynote, so I will have to completely throw away everything and start fresh, but at least you'll be able to see me think. Now, when I was asked to do this, I thought, really? A keynote to a whole lot of digital people involved in art? Can they really understand or comprehend anything about what we have been doing or what I and people close to me have been going through? And I started to reflect on art, and as someone who has been involved and pushing my life to the most serious of matters where we feel and live keenly because of the risks we take, I wondered, well, does art in the digital age really matter at all? Is it worth a damn? Or is it just a bunch of art wankers? So I think that's a really serious question. Are we just wasting our time? And we must ask this of ourselves every day, because every day that we do not live up to our principles is a wasted day. Every day that we do not strengthen our character by living out our principles is a wasted day. So are there principles involved in digital art? Are there any at all? Well, I have some people close to us involved, and actually you can see this logo comes from some of these people. This logo was developed by an Australian. It was developed by a young woman whose family was originally from Poland. And she was, before she designed this logo, immediately before, a quantum teleportation physicist that I met at the Australian National University. And it represents the flow of information from a dark world, bringing it into the light. And when art is done right, that is what it does. It represents some idealized form, some direction which we may follow, like a North Star or directions on the compass. It's not something of this world, rather it is a direction that we can either choose to strive to or flee from in this world. That coalition of basic Platonic forms, that basic understanding, the finding the essence of something, is what has made WikiLeaks a success. We took on not everything, but rather the essence of the hardest thing. We looked for what is the hardest game in town, the hardest situation to break through in publishing and communication. Not to publish everything, but to find that one thing, that true thing, that provably hard thing, and to tackle that. To find the essence of the problem and get at the essence of the problem. And by getting at its essence, try and make real progress for all the rest. And the essence here is an economic and political essence. The more economic power, the more political power it is put into suppressing something, the greater the signal that it gives off. Perhaps if it is released, it will change the world. So finding these forms and pursuing them, not just in art, but everywhere, is an important way of understanding the world, and it's an important way of changing the world. So the exploration of basic forms, the exploration of directions, the exploration of things that are not in this world, in order to understand where we are and gain a perspective. This is what art in general is good for, not just electronics. any discovery actually provides a compass, even if only 1%. And the 99% is an illusion, or it is mere wankery. That is an important 1% to keep. And perhaps it is worth all the nonsense that we see at conferences like this one. Perhaps, I don't know, you tell me. Now this week has been an important week for us. It's been an important week for everyone who is connected to the internet. And to understand everyone connected to the internet, we must understand that once upon a time, just going back 5 or 6 years ago, we could talk about people connected to the internet, and we could talk about others. We can't do that anymore. The internet has penetrated every aspect of our society. And our society has penetrated every aspect of the internet. These two civilizations have merged and fed upon one another and enriched each other and distorted each other. And there is no greater reflection of that than the revelations over the last week of Edward Snowden, and there is no greater example of that than the trial continuing this week, beginning last Monday, of Bradley Manning in the United States. Why is that? Edward Snowden revealed something that I have been speaking about for a long time, provided clear, concrete proof, almost perhaps an artistic, idealized form of that proof. That as the internet has penetrated every aspect of the society, riding on with it is mass surveillance. Mass surveillance by the National Security Agency of the United States, working in cooperation with its partners and other countries trying to do the same thing, although not nearly as effectively. You would have seen, some of you hopefully have seen the graph produced in the 4 pages released by the mainstream media detailing the National Security Agency's PRISM program. It shows the interflows of information between continents. And that is how people in this game look at it. Just like oil pipelines, connecting the raw energy supplies of entire continents. We now have a new source of wealth, a new war front, a new great game for the bulk flows of information that connect humanity together, to grab onto them, to surround them like armies surround oil wells or customs agents surround goods crossing the border. That graph shows, for example, that 99% of communications flows from Latin America flow out through the United States to get to Australia, to get to Asia, to get to Europe. And as they pass through the United States, they're intercepted, indexed, stored by the National Security Agency. Similarly, it shows that when Australians communicate to Latin America and they communicate to Europe, their communications flow through bulk interception points of the National Security Agency. There has been a change that has occurred under Obama. Let's go back to Bush. Some of these revelations about the bulk collection of telecommunications call records within the United States from Verizon and AT&T came out in 2006 and came out under the Bush government. What happened there? Well, there was an executive order given. That executive order pushed those companies to comply, promise them immunity. Bush corrupted the presidency, corrupted the Constitution, corrupted a few big telecommunications companies in the United States. But we have seen a transition under Obama. Obama promised more transparency. He promised many things. Those people who were watching closely how he appointed his security advisors understood well before he was elected that those promises would not be fulfilled. What Obama has done is similar to what most good Democrats do. They do it well on paper, but corrupt the system. While Bush corrupted the presidency and a few telecommunications companies, Obama, in order to do things properly, in order to do things on paper, not only corrupted the presidency, he corrupted the courts. He corrupted the FISA court, which issued secret orders. He corrupted the Senate oversight committees that oversee the intelligence agencies and oversee the FISA court. He corrupted political opposition in the media. And we've seen the New York Times, an essentially democratic institution, sit on these stories, including stories of our own. There's a reason Edward Snowden did not go to the New York Times, and he said so explicitly. Because they suppressed stories. They suppressed, in fact, this story going back to 2006 about the National Security Agency whistleblower revelations then. So Obama then, once finished with corrupting the mechanisms of government, moved on to apply leverage to corrupt all the big US tech companies, Google, Facebook, Skype, Microsoft, all of them sucked in to this new regime. Now, we might think that the internet is a place where we are all equals and we all communicate, and it is a new civilian world, a new world where we can develop our ideas and understandings of how planet Earth actually works, where in some sense we are all equal because we can all communicate to everyone. They may not want to listen, but at least if they do, we can send it to anyone. But it is not an equal place. This week's revelations have proven it is very far from an equal place and is very far from a civilian place. The internet has been transformed into a militarily occupied state, when all of our private communications, heartfelt, the inner core of our life, communications between boyfriends and girlfriends, between husbands and wives, sons and daughters, between business partners, even between bureaucracies and states, when all of those communications are swept up, hoovered up into a vast collection apparatus, indexed and stored for all time, available only to a select few, then we're in a situation where we have a tank on the street of the inner core of our lives, where we have a soldier under our bed, listening to everything that a husband and wife says to each other when they're communicating on email or SMS. The penetration of the digital of civilian life is also the penetration of the military and intelligence agencies of civilian life. Now I want to go back and look at what I wrote in this book, Cypherpunks, back in October 2012. And the reason I don't hold it up for long, because it is available in almost every country but Australia. It's even available in London, of all places. I wrote then, the world is not sliding, but galloping into a new transnational dystopia. This development has not been properly recognized outside of national security circles. It has been hidden by secrecy, by complexity, and by scale. The internet, our greatest tool of emancipation, has been transformed into the most dangerous facilitator of totalitarianism that we have ever seen. The internet has become a threat to human civilization. These transformations have come about silently because those who know what is going on in the global surveillance industry have no incentives to speak out. Left to its own trajectory, in some years, global civilization will be a postmodern surveillance dystopia call for action. We must communicate what we have learned while there is still a chance for you, the reader, to understand and act what is happening. It is time to take up the arms of our new world, the internet, and I will explain what those arms are. To fight for ourselves and for those we love. Our task is to secure self-determination where we can, to hold back the coming dystopia where we cannot, and if all else fails, to accelerate its destruction. Now, I don't know if Edward Snowden read those words, but I do know that he read and paid close attention to the case of Bradley Manning and the community of people that I am involved in, who have been trying to expose this phenomena for a long time. What Snowden provided was, going back to our description of art, an idealized proof. He provided a direction where he provided a clear direction so that we can understand where we are now. And for that, he is certainly a hero in his character, but he is also a hero to all, in fact, of humanity, all humanity. Because this phenomena is something that affects all of humanity. And if we're not careful, is going to rip out the most important and cherished aspects of our freedom in this new world that we have been transforming, galloping into with such glee. Now that seems like a very negative description of the state of the world. But I want to talk about another phenomenon. Simultaneously, as the internet has penetrated society and military and security agencies have come in together with it, like crabs in the tide, and penetrated and intercepted our most important communications. We have, over the last 4 years, developed a new body politic, an unconscious body politic that's not even aware yet of itself. That new body politic is natural. If a group of people are placed together for the first time in an island, or if this audience stayed in this hall for the next 6 months, it would develop an understanding about what it found to be important and what its hopes were and what its dreams were. The internet, in bringing people together, in penetrating nearly every society, has created a new realm where political discussion about values, discussion about what is important to us as a race, as a human race, has developed. Now, it is still unrecognized to most of the people who are going through it. But of course, it is only natural. There cannot be anything else. When we put people together and we have them communicate, they develop certain values and understandings. The transition over the last 4 years has been to take the internet from a politically apathetic space into a political space, where those people who are engaged with it understand the decisions that affect the internet also affect their lives online and affect their lives offline. And they want to fight to preserve those things that they find important and fight to suppress those who would take them away. And the alleged actions of Bradley Manning and Snowden and many others are part of that phenomenon, part of that development of a new understanding of who we are as an international people. Of course, it has come with the youngest people, people under the age of 20, people who were in effect born into this world, who went through their initial struggles of adulthood in this world, who are educated by this world, who are educated by our beliefs, by what we have seen, and by this mass political education, the undreamt of political education in human history. There has never been such a moment where so many people from so many places They've seen what the world is really like, what their place in the world is, what the place and behaviour of others near to them truly is. From that, there has been a distillation of values. Now, it is only beginning, and they are still hard to see, and most people involved still can't see them. But we have already something that is clear to me, a distillation of the first value of our new global civilization. And that first value is something that is coupled to the network itself. It is the right to communicate, the right to speak what we believe, the right to receive information from others. It is those rights which are associated with United Nations Article 19, the right to receive and impart information in any medium across frontiers. Of course, that is the first right that comes out, because it is inherent in the interaction. And when we see proper polls, an open poll for any organisation or individual who best reflects the values of this new world, who do we see winning? In 2012, the Open Human Rights Award that anyone could vote for California. Who was it won by? Was it won by some princess? Was it won by the head of Amnesty? No, it was won by Bradley Manning, because he symbolises the values of this new world. In 2013, it was conducted again. Who won it in 2013? I won it in 2013 as a symbol that my struggle is a symbol for the values that are important in this new world. The 2012 Guardian Person of the Year, who won it with 70% majority? Was it Pussy Riot in Russia, who were also on the poll? No. They received 2.3% of the vote. In the English-speaking world, who won that poll with 70% of the vote? It was Bradley Manning, because he represents, through his struggle, the values of our new world. If we go back to Time magazine in 2011, their open poll on who should win the Time magazine Person of the Year. Who won it? Anonymous. Because they represented the values that people find important in this struggle. We go back to 2010, when I was in prison and in solitary confinement. Who won the Time magazine Person of the Year? I did, with 20 times the vote of Mark Zuckerberg, who Time magazine decided to give the award to. For any democratic mechanism, we can see the true beliefs of people, international people, at least in English, being reflected by voting for those that they find to be symbols of what they believe to be important. It's not that Julian Assange is so cool. It's not that Bradley Manning is so cool. It's rather that their struggle represents this symbol that all of us treasure. And even though we have not yet perhaps consciously understood what rights we want to enshrine and to uplift, what distilled rights, what idealized forms of rights that we want in the new international world that has been connected together by the internet, we see people who are struggling for those rights. And we recognize in their struggle that somehow they represent what we truly believe. So there is a question, what other idealized forms of rights and values will be distilled? And that is in part your job as artists to find them, to experiment and to present them. Now, coming to Australia, if we look at the polling over the last over the last year and a half, 4 polls for me and for the WikiLeaks party. Once again, it's not that Julian Assange is such a fantastic fellow, or the WikiLeaks party is such a brilliant organisation. only know too well some of its difficulties and struggles as a young organisation, but rather it clearly represents something that people find to be valuable. We've had, across all those polls, WikiLeaks, across the polling for me, we see 25% nationwide support by the Labour Party's own polling agency, UMR. 25% voting intention, the first poll a year and a half ago. Again, 26%. 26% again. And the most recent poll, another one by Morgan Research, 26% voting intention for me in Victoria. If we look for people under the age of 40, Australia-wide, 40% voting intention. Something is going on, something really remarkable is going on. It's not that WikiLeaks is such an incredible organisation, but rather the values it represents by its struggle is something that people want to hold up and capture as a symbol and protect. And it's not that often, you're in the luxurious position of seeing an organisation or a person really fight for their values. And our struggle has shown that we won't be cowed, that we really believe in this stuff. If we didn't believe in it, we would have walked a long time ago in fear or taken a bribe, etc. Now, other people may equally have just as strong values, but they haven't been through the conflict that has proven their values in this way. And that's an important thing. Now, going back to the mass interception that is occurring, how can we struggle against this? Well, one way, yes, there are technical steps such as cryptography. The other is to understand the power of this new body politic that has developed internationally in English and in other languages and domestically in Australia, to harness this new body politic. We always talk about the internet being the one thing that can smash through the manufacture of consent, the historical manufacture of consent by corrupt media organisations. And it's true. The internet has largely provided a mechanism to get around the worst of this manufacturing of consent. But when we see the mandate, the democratic mandate coming out of these polls, we can understand there's another way to get change, to erect these values as part of a measured mandate. That's what elections are about when they work well. It's to measure what people really want, what the majority of people want, what values they find to be important, and then to instill those values in an individual or a group of individuals who people are confident will represent them. Let's understand how this surveillance system that Snowden has most forcefully exposed this week is represented in Australia. Philip Dorling in the Sydney Morning Herald, a fine national security journalist, has revealed that there's extensive interference. And for those people who have been following the spy agencies like me for 20 years, it's no surprise at all that the Defence Signals Director of DSD in Australia is part of the system, it's part of the collection system. But, and we see that some of the documents themselves that Snowden has released show that GCHQ, the sister organisation of the National Security Agency, and the DSD entered into the prison program back in 2011. The Anglophone Alliance of Security Organisations is being knitted together in a tighter and tighter network. Now, if Australia had a population of 200 million, perhaps in some ways that could be acceptable, although there is still a risk of what William Binney, National Security Agency scientist, calls turnkey totalitarianism, where you build all the structure for totalitarianism, just like similar structures erected under the We have built it now. All it requires is a bad government, and arguably looking at the extrajudicial assassination programs in the United States, perhaps we're working at that. We have already built this structure, and it just requires turning the key. Now, in Australia, we have less than 1/10 of the population of the United States. Australia is being turned into US aircraft carrier in the Pacific. It's being turned into a giant signal interception station. Australia needs a strong defence. Every country needs a strong defence if it is to keep its sovereignty, if it is to keep its own self-determination and not have it imposed by others. But even Malcolm Fraser now says that effectively that Australia has been overrun by US interests. And that works at a practical level. It works by cross-training programs where key members of the Australian military and key members of the Australian Defence Signals Directorate and others are sucked into the system, flown off to the US, get preferment control. It works at a higher level with individuals like Bob Carr and Mark Adib sucked into the US embassy system back in the 70s, lifted up in various ways, given information about how to pursue their careers. Mark Adib, formerly member of Cabinet in Australian Labor Cabinet, one of the primary power brokers that put Gillard in place in the coup against Rudd, described in the cables released by WikiLeaks as a long-time source to the US Embassy. A source, in fact, they describe throughout his political rise. Australia is the easiest place in the world for US intelligence agencies to work. We have less than 1/10 of the population of the United States, and we are the easiest country in the world to work. Why? Because we speak English, because our structures are basically the same as the United States. We're a younger country, and so the hidden class structure is not so hidden as it is, for example, here in the United Kingdom. Australia was referred to back in the 1960s by the KGB as the place you go for R&R, similarly from the CIA. The penetration of the Australian Union movement by successive so-called labour attachés working out of the US Embassy is something that has been happening in the 60s. That's why you see Foreign Minister Bob Carr even admit to meeting in his 20s alone, as he was working for the unions with the US Embassy at least 3 times. What does a New South Wales union man have to do with the United States Embassy? Similar figures have been corrupted in Australian politics, and the majority from the Australian Labor Party, like Bob Hawke, still a relatively popular figure in Australia, but the Kissinger cables released by WikiLeaks demonstrate the extent, partly demonstrate the extent of his political corruption, his attempted political subversion and giving him political intelligence on the Whitlam government. So Australia really has a difficult time to secure its own sovereignty in the face of an English-speaking power that is over 10 times the size and has the basic structures. There's very little barrier to entry. And that is why we have to take absolute care that this militarisation of cyberspace, the militarisation of civilian life, is kept as far as possible from Australia. Not by weakening Australia's security or its military, but rather by strengthening them to make them more independent, so that they're actually working for Australian values. To strengthen the Australian government, to strengthen Canberra, so it is actually working for Australians. It is not working for networks that people like Mark Adib or Bob Hawke or the Foreign Minister Bob Carr have been developing for years and years. Who do they represent when they get into Canberra, really? Of course, they represent their networks. They represent the US Embassy. Bob Carr, who does he really represent? represent? Well, he also represents the quarry bank. And you know exactly where he's going to go after the election. He'll go off to some high-paid US consulting job or back to the quarry bank. Similarly for Gillard and Verlof, they can see the ship is going down, so what are they doing? Selling off the heirlooms as fast as possible, doing favours for friends in order to find another ship to escape. That's the reality of Australian politics, and it has to be stopped. And it has to be stopped by bringing people who have proven themselves to be incorruptible to this phenomenon, bringing them into Canberra and to clean out this sort of activity. It also needs to be done by laying down protective legislation. In 2011 to 2012, there were 300,000 warrantless, at least 300,000 warrantless collections of data on Australian citizens by Australian police forces and the Attorney General's office. That doesn't include the bulk interception that the National Security Agency is doing, which runs to, for the United States alone, over 2 billion interceptions per month, just through the US IT companies. The 300,000 figure is just what we can see easily. So we have to ask the question, given the relationship between the Defence Signals Directorate, Australia's bulk spying agency, and the National Security Agency, and ASIO and the CIA and the National Security Agency, are we seeing an effective laundry pattern? Because this has happened in other countries. So the United States has some legislation very, very poorly applied and poorly interpreted, saying that, well, under certain circumstances, they can intercept the telecommunications content of Americans. So they can intercept the metadata, the description of who speaks to who, which reveals the entire social structure of a country. They can intercept all that without a warrant. But they need to be a little bit careful about intercepting Americans. But the way this intelligence game has worked in the past is countries just intercept their citizens for each other. The Defence Signals Directorate can be tasked by the United States to intercept US citizens for which they're concerned that there may need to be some kind of judicial oversight, and then simply pass on the information, and vice versa. So how much of the vast hoovering apparatus that the National Security Agency has constructed is in fact being accessed by DST? Well, we know that a lot of it's a spooky argument. We know that a lot of information being pulled across, according to the report by the law. So let us first understand what is going on. These revelations by Snowden. If we go back 2 weeks, we live in that same world. We don't understand what world we're in. How many other things exist in the world right now that we don't know about? Well, of course, statistically, there must be many more revelations of a much vaster scale. The true history which exists and underpins the nature of our current civilization. So we must first start to reveal what is actually going on. We must have full and proper transparent reporting on the behaviour of ASIO and DST and the other intelligence organisations in Australia. What are the nature of their sharing relationships with the United States? What information are they collecting on Australians? The ASIO and DST must be susceptible to the Freedom of Information Act. Even the CIA in the United States is susceptible to the Freedom of Information Act. Of course, it finds many excuses to avoid responding to the Freedom of Information Act, such as national security exemptions or cannot confirm or deny and so on. But it is simply not acceptable to ring-fence off an organisation like ASIO, which is has increased nearly 4 times in size in the last 8 years. To ring-fence it off and create a land where transparency does not apply, where there can be no scrutiny to its activities, when we know it's associated with a system of unprecedented abuse and unprecedented danger. ASIO and DSD must be susceptible to Freedom of Information Act requests. It must be possible for us as Australians to understand what the Australian government is doing and how it is behaving, how it is dispensing its authority. Similarly, where privacy is violated, it must be done so under the stringent conditions. There must be an audit trail. It cannot be the case that without warrants, hundreds of thousands of Australians are intercepted per year. That is not acceptable. The WikiLeaks party, if it is elected to government, will insist that all interceptions of Australians take place under judicial basis. And those authorities intercepting Australians must report twice yearly to Parliament about their activities, and they must be susceptible to the Freedom of Information Act. And it's not enough to simply say this in legislation. There must be political will to defend and expose. We see legislation everywhere. We also see that legislation is not enforced, it is not carried out. It is not my intent to go into politics in Australia, to sit there and constantly write laws that are not enforced. Rather, the Australian Parliament is a platform to erect and gain certain discussions in the Australian populace. And it is the political will that is revealed by those discussions which enforce discipline by the Australian government. So in closing and asking for questions, I would like to direct you to something that many people have asked me, which is about civic courage. When I was young, I believed that intelligence was the rare commodity. If only people had intelligence, they could see further. And having seen further, they could understand. And everything else would come out from that. But yes, systems are hidden by complexity and need intelligence to cut through them. They need idealized forms, they need simplification, so we can understand them. They're also hidden, however, by secrecy. And no amount of intelligence alone will cut through secrecy. What is needed to cut through secrecy is some form of civic courage. And men like Mr. Snowden have shown that extreme degree of civic courage. But when you think about Mr. Snowden and you say, I couldn't possibly do that, how could I do that? I wouldn't even know where to begin to do that. I don't know that I could achieve anything important, and the risks seem profound. I have children that need to be protected. I have students that I need to care for. How could I simply leap off a bridge